welcome to the EmpowerHer series. I'm your host, Jessica Jane. This series is all about real women, real stories, and real growth. Our stories have power, and when we share them, we remind others that they're never alone. Get ready to be inspired. This is EmpowerHer.
Hello, Carolyn. So we have got the beautiful Carolyn Hobday with us today, and I'm super excited to have you on the Empower Her episode of 2026, which is super exciting. I'm really looking forward to actually getting to know a little bit more about your background and story. I don't know much yet, but what I do know has really excited me because I think it's going to be a great topic on something that I've been talking a lot about lately, and that's the masculine and feminine energy. And from what I know so far, is that you very much work with men as well as women, helping them to kind of work better together. And I think that the masculine and feminine energy that I've been talking a lot about lately is going to come in really nicely with it, actually. So I'm super excited to dive into that with you. So before we get started, can you just introduce yourself for anybody that might not know you yet? Just a little bit about you and what you actually do.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on in the first place. So I'm Carolyn Hobday. I am by background and profession an HR professional. I've been doing that for 25 years, I have to confess now. And what I really specialize in is about leadership, working with teams, but I'm particularly passionate about working with men, male leaders in particular, and really trying to bridge that divide that I think we've developed, not just between the genders in terms of male and female, although that's a piece of work in and of itself, but actually what I call between the patriarchy and the wokerati. So how are we bridging the divides, both in terms of genders, but also generations?
Okay, brilliant. Love that. So can you go a little bit deeper into your actual background and the story behind what's actually led you to doing the work you're doing now?
Absolutely. So, like I said, spent a long career in HR in some really large organizations. So I've got a big corporate background. I left the corporate world in March 2020. So now nearly 6 years ago. It seems mad, but so 6 years ago, left the corporate world and became an independent HR and leadership development consultant. And I left because in 2018, a lot happened to me. I lost a lot in 2018. I lost everything, and I'm sure we'll go into that in due course. But really, as I've evolved over time, realizing that having worked in some very male intensive environments, also having had quite a lot of close encounters of the male kind, I guess, in my personal life, and really all of that conspired. And I'll be honest, I started off thinking that then what I was all about was about just about women, about empowering women, working with women. And then actually over time, I've really realized that the best way to help women, to change things for women, is not about trying to break men down, not about trying to smash the patriarchy, which I really don't subscribe to. Actually, the best way that we can make the world and the world of work in particular better for women, in my view, is to work with men and actually to help them to evolve, change, really deconstruct the patriarchy themselves because they see the benefit of it, because they see the benefit of everybody having equity, space, opportunity, because there is value in all of that.
hmm Yeah, I love that. And there's so many areas about that I'd really love to dig into. Um, First of all, though, we will dive a little bit deeper into. So you have spoken openly about losing everything in such a short space of time. So can you explain to us a little bit more about what that looked like for you? But also, do you feel that how it's reshaped you, your identity, and how it's moved your direction forward as well?
Absolutely. So in 2018, I lost everything. So I lost my job and I lost my relationship. So my partner, just at the point when I was trying to navigate the fact that I was losing my job because of some toxicity that was going on in the workplace where I was, I lost my job, and my partner chose that moment to tell me that at the point that our house sold, which we were on the brink of that at the time, our relationship was over. And I would not see him or his children ever again. Turns out he'd found somebody else, which is why he wanted such a swift exit of me. So, in the space of 10 days, lost my job, lost my home, my partner, my stepchildren, the whole thing fell away. And, I was absolutely, sort of razed to the ground. I was on my knees, emotionally, practically. And it was a huge turning point for me in terms of how I saw myself. It led to the writing of my first book, which came on the back of quite a long period of therapy, because I really had to understand how had I ended up in that place? How had I got to that point? Why had it turned out that way? And it wasn't just a one-off, it was a bit of a recurring pattern, not to that extremity, but a recurring pattern in the relationships that I had. And I think at that point, I think it really redirected me because I had to, because I'd sort of lost everything. I had to go back to ground zero in all areas of my life and go, who am I? What do I stand for? What do I want? Where do I want to go? And like I said, really examine how I'd got to that point in the first place. And the rebuild from there completely reshaped me in terms of what I wanted. I didn't fix it all. The patterns recurred, and I think that in itself has been a learning process as well in recent times. But it really set me on a different course and a different path. And whilst I found another job, like I said, in 2020, I was like, do you know what? I want to step away from this and work in a different way.
Hmm. It really resonates with me actually, and I'm sure it will with many people. And I know when I went through a very similar experience, um, I felt very similar in the way of I was just to my knees and very much like, what do I do now? Like everything I've ever known for so many years has just gone. And I kind of felt like it made me realize I actually lost myself. And I didn't know who I was just as me anymore without that other person in my life. And it really does, doesn't it? It makes you dig a lot deeper to just rediscover yourself, step into your own power again, find out your way without anybody else's influences as well. And it's a lot to take on, and it's such a hard space to be in at that time. But I think a big thing that I always talk about, and on a lot of the podcasts as well, is how the hardest times we go through always tend to be the times that we really see so much growth within ourselves because it pushes you, doesn't it, to that growth and out of your comfort zone as well because you haven't got those comforts to fall back on anymore. So even though they're awful things to go through, you normally find something great does come out of the other side of it as well. So I love that, and I know that so many people will resonate with your story of how you've kind of come through the other end of that as well, and really worked on yourself, which I think is a huge thing, isn't it? To not disconnect from who we are, whether we're in a relationship or not, whether we're a mum. There's so many factors that we end up losing ourselves. So I'm really happy that you've kind of turned that completely around.
Yeah.
So do you feel like within those moments of everything falling away from you as well, is there something that you do feel like you've learned about yourself that you couldn't have learned any other way unless that had actually happened?
Yes, and I think a lot of that was about my own value. The relationship that broke down was actually an abusive relationship, so it was very toxic. And you talk about losing yourself, and that was 100% what happened. And I know in a lot of abusive relationships and toxic situations, people do. You allow it to change you, you chip away at who you are, your boundaries fall away, you're doing stuff to keep the peace, you're people pleasing, all of those things that were going on. Definitely, I was doing all of that. And rediscovering my value on the back of that, I think, was the really key thing. I would have liked it to have happened in a different way, but the reality was when all of those parts fell away, as other people will talk about and attest to, you really do understand who shows up in those moments. And sometimes it surprises you who shows up versus actually who doesn't.
Mm,
Sometimes the people who you really think, oh, they'd be there for me, this is a really strong relationship. Sometimes they just don't know what to do, they don't know what to say, and they kind of drop away. And then there's other people who absolutely step forward and step up. And I think I learned so much about my value because of how many people stepped forward.
mm,
And I think I'd lost all sense of value. The partner I was with had absolutely chipped away at that. And you just think you're worthless and nobody cares. And they try really hard in that abuse to isolate you. And actually, suddenly, all these people showed up for me. And I thought they wouldn't just be doing that if they didn't care. I mean, they are all good people for sure. But I thought it had to say something about who I was, that
mm,
they took the time, the trouble, the kindness to show up for me and in the ways that they did, in all sorts of different ways. But I realized in that moment, I have value because these people wouldn't just show up for
mm,
no reason. It must be because there's some reciprocity in our relationship that they think is worth their time, their effort, and their energy.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great point, actually, because I think so many people go through that of losing their self-worth and their values and just accepting things for the way it is. You kind of just fall into that again, even though being in your comfort zone is such a weird name, isn't it? Because it's not actually comfortable. Your comfort zone is never a comfortable place, but that's our comfort zone.
Mm.
So we get stuck in the comfort zone, and think that, and I know you always have thoughts of thinking, the what if this, and what if I don't find anybody else, and what if this, and what if that. So many people actually stay stuck in those kind of relationships of the fear of the unknown, and they stay in those situations. So I had to really go through a journey of um, self-worth. I read a book once actually that really made me realize how little self-worth I actually had. And it kind of I had a complete emotional meltdown once I realized how little self-worth I actually had, and I had to just really learn how to love me again. So they're great points to make, because I know so many people will be in positions like that where they really do just need to come back to themselves again. And I know many people listening will also have experienced toxic and abusive relationships. So what advice would you give to those people that know something isn't right, but they feel they're stuck and not ready to leave?
I think the most important thing for me is to believe yourself. Because what happens is, I think, particularly as women, I have to say, I think we are conditioned quite a lot to go, well, this is kind of what happens, or we need to put up with it, or like you say, who will I be with, or what will I have, or where will my worth sit if I'm not with somebody? I think that we are conditioned, again, I think more to women than men, but I think in general, we're conditioned to make excuses and go, maybe it's not that bad, maybe they didn't mean that. And certainly in the abuse I was going through, I was referred to it as like a dripping tap, where there was no one big thing. I wasn't hit physically, albeit that I was intimidated physically, but it was lots of small things. And I think if I'd gone to any of my friends really and said, this person did this one thing, then they'd have worked with me in a sense of trying to find the reasons why that might have been and explaining it away. It's when you add all of those bits together that it starts to form a picture, a very ugly picture, of what's happening. So I think the thing that I learned, and the thing that I always say to women, is that you might not be ready to leave at this moment in time, and you have to reach that point where you are. But in the first instance, you have to believe yourself that if it doesn't feel right,
Mm,
very, very likely it is not right, because I still believe that deep down in our gut, we know. We know if it feels off. We know if it isn't how we should be treated. We know if we feel a sense of pain or our nervous system is reacting. We know. And we look for evidence and data where in fact we are the evidence and data.
mm,
So trust in that gut, believing yourself, believing that this is not right, for me is the foundational level. Once you've got that and you've got that bit of certainty to stand on, that you know it's not right, then you can start to build from there and go, right, so what is the next step of me trying to extract myself from this situation? But you've got
mm.
to believe yourself first and foremost.
Yeah, I love that. There's so much to be said with just trusting and listening to ourselves, isn't there? And again, I think we brush it off and ignore things and to make those excuses out of the comforts and the attachments and love that we obviously do have for that person as well. Um, those kind of emotional ties keep you going for a lot longer than maybe you should have actually kept going. So yeah, I do think that's really important work to do for ourselves. Um, and with the conference, with you saying about working with men and women and helping bring them together and work together in a better way, is what really interests me actually. There was a man that I was speaking to a while back who said something that really made me actually think, oh my God, like I've never actually thought about it like that. And he's right. Because I host a lot of women empowerment days and women brunches and just women getting together. And I love the fact that you've said that you started in that journey of empowering women, but then you very much started to realize it was also about men. Which reminds me of this particular man actually. And he came to an event that was open to men as well, but it was very a big women audience, a couple of men. I think, yeah, we was it? I mean, he might have only been the one man at the time, actually. So we did very well to speak out. And he said that he he says he's got nothing against all these like women empowerment, women coming together, women brunches, all these kind of things. But he says what he does struggle with is women saying that men don't understand this, men don't understand this, men aren't there for us for this, and whatever it be. But we come into just a woman's circle to talk about it. So how do men ever understand what women need and how they need to change to support women if we only speak about it with other women? And I was like, he's really like, and then some women poked up saying about feeling uncomfortable talking about certain subjects or stuff like that. But he was like, but again, how do we know you feel like that if you're never telling us because you feel uncomfortable to tell us? We could never change. So something like that really like made me think, yeah, yeah, he's right. So I love the fact that you have really brought men into this as well. So in your own opinion, why do you feel and believe that real progress for women cannot happen without men being part of that conversation?
For exactly what you've described. I think
Yeah.
unless we go on the journey together,
Mhm.
then we're only ever going to be running in parallel and not truly understanding each other. And I think it's as incumbent on women to understand about men that it is on men to understand about women. And I think what I'm starting to see in society, what I'm talking about on LinkedIn, what I'm getting feedback about from the men themselves, and not least because they don't actually feel empowered themselves to say it at the moment, and increasingly so in society, is that men are starting to feel demonized. They are seen as negative. They are feeling irrelevant. Certainly, if you get men in their sort of 40s and 50s, which, let's be honest, in organizations, if you've got leaders, and again, still statistically, there are more male leaders than there are female leaders. So you've got men in organizations in leadership positions who typically then are in their 40s and 50s because that's the stage in life when you tend to get into those roles. And we're telling them that they're rubbish, they're bad, they've designed this patriarchy that's, pushing us down when in fact they were not the designers of it. They might perpetuate it, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly. But we're telling them that they're irrelevant. We're starting to make them invisible because it is all about let's have these women's groups and the empowerment of women. It is about other genders and diversity. So I think that men, it's so important that we take them with us because they're actually feeling really pushed out of the picture. I've talked to several people, some of the men impacted on the end of it themselves, some of the people that are in these organizations or working with them, where you've even had people say around DEI agendas, people have challenged and gone, well, there's nothing for example, for white males. And the organization's gone, well, that's not very diverse. It's like, well, no, because it absolutely is diverse because they are one of
Mm.
the sections of your workforce. So it's just as important that we are doing things and talking to, males, white heterosexual males, however far you want to take that. So like I said, we will only ever run in parallel with each other, but sort of like never the twain will meet, while ever we keep women in one group going, isn't it all terrible? And we need to smash the patriarchy. And then we've got men who are, I think, increasingly almost camping in the opposite camp because they feel demonized, where it's like, well, we're actually quite hard done to. It's not great. We're being pushed out. There aren't any of these initiatives for us.
Mm.
We're being told we're bad and we're responsible for all this stuff, but we're pitching man against woman. And
Mhm.
haven't we been spending decades now working, to avoid that? But it's the
Mhm.
pendulum has swung almost, in my view, so far the other way that we're pushing men out in favor of women and others. But actually, what we should be doing, I'm really not a fan of the term equality because I don't think that helps. That's about treating everybody the same. I'm interested in equity, where we
Mhm.
provide space and opportunity for difference,
Mhm.
and we welcome all that. But we need to see men as one of those groups.
Yeah, 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 definitely. Um, so it's interesting that you obviously say how invisible men are feeling now and how much harder it is to be a man today. And this kind of comes into a little bit, it'll be interesting to see your thoughts on this actually, when I talk about the feminine and masculine energy, because I do feel like the chats I've been having recently are all about how, and I'm seeing it so much. I even went to a spa the other day and I was speaking to some girls that I met in the hot tub. And the way this girl was speaking about how she was like, well, I don't need a man. I don't need a man to hold the door for me. I don't need a man to pay for me. I've got my own money. And I'm like, well, I've got my own money, but it doesn't mean that a man can't treat me to something. What's wrong with that? Um, And it's made me think a lot about it actually. And I think women have like how you said, it's kind of gone so much the other way. And I feel like women have gone too much into their masculine energy that it is now what about we can stand on our own 2 feet. We don't need a man. We can obviously be entrepreneurs and have businesses and all this, which is absolutely great. And it is great that women don't just have to be at home anymore and just bring up the children and cook the dinner and do the cleaning. But I think we've took everything else on so much and stepped into this power far too much that it's very much we don't need men anymore. And one, I don't know why women have felt the need to go so much into that and not feel that safety around having that masculine energy there for them anymore. They want to take it all on themselves. And also how then men are feeling with that of like, what is their place anymore? How are they a man? And I think sometimes that could send men either one way or another of feeling invisible and thinking, well, what's the point of me anymore? Or and not knowing how to be around women, or the opposite way of maybe being so much more masculine to try and bring their power back into place of saying, well, no, I'm the man, so I will do this and I will do that. So what are your thoughts around that with that kind of
I
masculine
think,
and feminine energy?
yeah, I think it's a really tricky one, but I do feel that if we don't sort of get a handle on it, it will get more and more out of control. I
Hmm.
think that in relation to your first point around the women, I think that again, it's almost like this societal narrative. And of course, you do come across people like you say you encountered women that you encountered that are really fiercely behind that. Um, I I tend to find that when you really strip that away, sometimes it's not quite so fierce. I think it's almost like this mask of like we need to be going, I don't need a man. It's almost disempowering if we say that, I want some of that masculine energy or I want a man or yeah, I want that kind of relationship. Whether that's at home, at work, however that manifests itself. So some of it I feel is that like playing up to it, it's like we've got to be badass and we've got to be fierce and we've got to be all of these words that get banded around. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. It's nothing wrong with women having their independence and all of those
Hmm.
things. Doesn't have to be at the expense of men, though, I
Yeah.
don't believe. And I think that's the bit where it tips over. And also, I'll be honest, I always say, well, if my house was on fire, I would want, a 6'2" man to come along and carry me down the ladder, not a 5'2" woman, just because of equality. I
Yeah.
think there is a role and the place, and there's a time, and I think there's an acceptance. Hence why I talk about equity. There's a time and a place to understand that we are different. Men and women are built differently,
Hmm.
physically, emotionally, mentally, and all of that's great. There should be space for all of it. So I think sometimes I feel now that women are having to play up to this idea of I've got to do it all and I've got to have it all and
Hmm.
I have to be everything in my own life. And it's like, well, none of us are meant to go through life on our own. And what I mean by that is not about just that an intimate relationship. I mean, we are meant to live in groups and communities and rely on each other and have different skills and different strengths.
Yeah.
We evolved, we've survived evolution because of that and living in
Hmm.
those groups. So I'm not quite sure why suddenly we all want to be an island and do everything ourselves. It's
Hmm.
actually not a good way to survive.
Hmm.
I think there's a bit of that narrative, I think, for women. I agree with you. I think what we then end up with is that men actually are sitting there going, I don't know what I'm now bringing to the party. I
Hmm.
don't know what my value is. So we've had a long time of what we talked at the start, women questioning their value. I think that happens a lot with women. I've experienced that a lot myself and in others where we talk about our worth and our value. I think men are now really experiencing that because they're like, well, you just keep telling me you just don't need me. Like, you don't need me for anything. And I don't think those men are necessarily going, you must need me in order to qualify for a mortgage or you must financially rely on me. I
Hmm.
don't, men aren't necessarily saying that, but they do want to understand what it means to be a man. And I think we've lost all sense of that.
Yeah.
I think you have to only talk to younger men for them to go, I don't know what that means now. I don't know what role I'm meant to play.
Hmm.
So I think we need to be redefining what we mean by masculinity and manliness and what it means to be a man. And I think
Hmm.
to help that to evolve and build and redefine it for the current age, certainly. And I think you're right. We then end up at that extreme level where men are over exaggerating their masculinity. you then start getting into conversations about Andrew Tate and that kind of discourse and popularity, let's be honest, around some of that, because then that's about the over assertion of that
Mm.
masculinity and the trying to recapture that power. And I think what we have to get away from is it being a power dynamic
Yeah.
and instead being much more nurturing, collaborative, cooperative. And I go back to equity.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think, and that is the thing, as humans as well, we thrive on that community and coming together properly and the masculine, there's a reason for masculine and feminine energy and it all interlinks so beautifully, but like we've stripped it away so much and recreated something that's took us away. I feel like it's great for us to advance and move forward in ways that we have, but at the same time I think we've come far too far away from what the truth really is, which has messed up a lot, I think, in all areas of life. So yeah, that's really interesting. And I know you've wrote a few books, haven't you? So are they
Yeah.
kind of based around these things? Can you give us a brief overview of what your books are about and what inspired them?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first book was my autobiography. I wrote that not as therapy, but on the back of therapy. I think when I came through the therapy, there were various points with my amazing therapist where I then suddenly thought, I should write this down actually, because this might be interesting, helpful to other women. So my first book was my autobiography. I wrote that actually because the book I wanted to write was the second book of that particular trilogy. Third book is still a work in progress, but the second book of that trilogy was all about how to define the life that you want, to understand, what are your values, what value do you bring, who are the people that you want in your life, how do you set it on the right course. And I wanted to write that book because that was the book on the back of everything crashing in 2018 that I wish I'd had. And I wanted to help others and write that. But actually, in wanting to do that, I realized what I needed to do was to tell the backstory of how I ended up there and sort of why I was qualified to advise people, write that and guide them. So I wrote my autobiography first so that I could go on and write the second book. In between those two, I wrote a much shorter book, which is interesting and based on some of what you talked about earlier. It was what was making me smile in terms of some of your content, because I wrote a self-help book for women in between those two books called Redefining Selfish, which was all about not having guilt, not having any regrets, but actually for women going, it's okay for me to be selfish and think about myself and what I want and to find my voice and to find my identity and really take back some of that control.
Mm.
So those are that's the books I've written. But yeah, so autobiography, then a sort of self-help for males and females in terms of how they want their life to be shaped, but a
Mhm.
self-help book in the middle for women.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I think that's great way to kind of bring your books out in the way of really sharing your story so openly and authentically and it comes from a very vulnerable place writing a book like that, doesn't it? But then sharing the tools and the skills and the mindsets that you've kind of got yourself along the way to help people actually implement what you're talking about as well, which is brilliant. And I know, like I say, writing a book can be a very hard thing, and especially being vulnerable in them. Do you feel like there was anything in your book that was like the hardest truth that you had to put down on a page?
Absolutely. My autobiography, I always said, was not designed to make me look great. It wasn't designed. I also didn't want to be a victim because for me, it was about, look, I made some choices. I have to take responsibility for the choices that I made. Now, other people did do some bad stuff, without a shadow of a doubt, and I'm not responsible for that, but I am responsible for allowing those people in or allowing those people to stay in my life or my responses to it. So some of the stuff that was hard was writing the things where I didn't cover myself in glory, but I thought that's part of my story. And for me, it was about showing that messiness of life, the messiness of adulting, and that we don't get it right all the time, and our lives don't look like our Instagram feed where it's all perfect and lovely.
Mm.
It's messy and it's difficult, and we make bad decisions sometimes. And I kind of wanted that to come out in the book as much as the other things that had happened to me that like I said, other people's behaviors that I wasn't responsible for. So it was hard. It's hard to put yourself out there in a way that says, at this point, in this moment, I was not the best version of myself. I wasn't graceful or gracious
Mhm.
or well thought through or any of those things. But what I was true and honest and messy and an adult.
Hmm. And that's some really great reflection work for yourself as well, isn't it? Because I think sometimes you do have to really strip it back in that way to not just pass blame and put everything on somebody else's. What was my role in these areas as well? And again, and I think that's a huge thing in how we grow ourselves. If we're not honest with ourselves and can really own up to our own crap, I was going to swear then, but then how do you grow from that? How do you change from that if you can't own up to it? Um, so yeah, that's great. And do you feel with your books, I know that they're very obviously there's different books, but is there if there was one thing that somebody could take away from reading your books, what would it be?
I think it's about really sort of exactly what you've just said. We've got to start with ourselves. We have to, however hard that is. And really, the second book of the trilogy is about using tools and techniques to hold that mirror up in terms of who am I? What am I? How do I show up? What are the beliefs and assumptions that I have about the world, about myself? Because if you can't own that, then you're always going to have a distorted view of the world, or you're always going to have a distorted view of the interactions that you have and other people. And I talk about this a lot with leaders and leadership that I work with. If you don't know who you are, if you're not self-aware around the beliefs and the patterns and the things that trigger you and the lens with which you view the world, then funnily enough, you're always going to struggle in terms of that leadership because people are going to recognize that you're not maybe true to yourself, you're not genuine, you're not self-aware, maybe you're putting on a mask, all of those things. And so if you can't see that in the first instance, so that for me is the main thread, is about that peeling back the layers of that onion, I guess is the way that I would put it, to go like, who am I really? And most people just avoid that bit and want to go, like you say, straight to the how do I make other people be different
Hmm.
to suit me, rather than how might I change and be different and then start getting different outcomes.
Yeah, yeah, that's brilliant. And I think definitely that is the only way forward, really, isn't it? Is to really learn those things about yourself in that way. And do you feel like there's anything we need to unlearn?
I do in all sorts of different areas. I do. I think that it depends on sort of who you talk to, really. If I was to talk to the men, I think we have to sort of unlearn this idea of masculinity as it was and relearn something and redefine something different. And we need to unlearn some of the bits of the patriarchy and really see it for what it is. And again, deconstruct some of that. Keep the bits that work. Not everything
Mm.
about the patriarchy is bad. We've come a really long way as a country, as a world, as a society on the back of some of that, but then there's some bits that need to change. So let's unlearn some of those things. I think as women, I think we need to unlearn some of that sense of disempowerment. But for me, it's not about letting the pendulum swing so far the other way that we then are so, badass and almost angry in our delivery of what our empowerment is. So I think, that sense of disempowerment that we have had and we still carry. And I think a bit of that sense of injustice that women still have it, things really have moved on a lot. Women have really made it in so many ways. We do have so many things that, decades ago wouldn't even have been possible. So
Mhm.
let's stop being angry about that and about how that was back then. And
Mhm.
let's start going flipping heck. Like, we've now got a world of opportunity. Let's go forward and move forward with that in a positive way, rather than at times I feel like a bit of a chip on our shoulder, if I'm honest. Let's
Yeah,
get
yeah.
rid of it.
Yeah, definitely. That's a brilliant way to be finishing up with. So, coming up to the end of this episode, we always finish with the same question, and that is, what does empowerment mean to you?
For me, it's about the freedom to own who you are and to live the life that's right for you, because you have the freedom to do that. And I think that somebody said to me recently that where you have an imbalance of power and that person disrespects you, then that is abuse. And I think empowerment is the opposite of that, is the ability to go basically like F you. I have the power to step away from this and I'm not beholden to you. So for me, that's empowerment. It all comes from freedom.
I love that. I love the word freedom. Um, What a great way to end the episode. I'm so excited to be following your journey and seeing how you bring all this work together because I think it is such important work and you're definitely on the right track with this. It's definitely the way that we all need to be moving forward. So I'm very excited to see how it unfolds. I will also put a link to your books and things into your episode as well because I think that'll be great for people to get easy access to because I think they'll really help people in so many ways. And so, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the episode, and we'll keep in touch and we'll see where everything goes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn.